I'm the convener of the extension task group that works on sensitive species data. I'd like to start. It's customary in Australia to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we stand. In my case, it's the Ngunnawal people, and I acknowledge their traditional owners, past and present. And I'd welcome anybody wishing to acknowledge the traditional owners in the land in which they're joining this meeting from, and please feel free to use the chat to do so. I assume, Tanya, you've already introduced yourself, but Tanya is my stalwart colleague on the group that works on the extension task group, and also I believe hopefully Piers Higgs, another of the leads in the group, should be in the call or joining the call shortly. So thank you all for joining us this evening, this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Ben Norton did ask us to make a couple of introductory notes before we started. So the sensitive species data extension group operates. We've got a specified task. We're trying to develop an extension that deals with sensitive species data. We've got members from right around the world who all have differing interests in the space. We meet, well, we try to meet once a month. We normally try to agree the date of the next meeting at the previous meeting, though I will note that that's kind of gone slightly awry in July because of, in April because of this meeting. What we're trying to basically move the extension along pretty quickly because it's sorely needed in many organisations and places around the world. And so we really hope to those people who've joined the call who aren't part of the working group that you might consider joining us. What we're really after are different perspectives on the nature of sensitive species data and how it needs to be dealt with in biodiversity data management. And so what we're really after are people who are keen to participate and bring differing viewpoints to the table. Besides attending meetings, we do try to record all of the meetings and share them. All of the substantive content that we're talking about, we try to exchange via email, and we try to encourage members to share views if they can't make meetings because the timing's inconvenient or they have other priorities. Ben asked us to mention that after the working session, the Tadwig group will be posting the session to the Tadwig YouTube channel. And so before that happens, you do have we'll have the option to set our session's visibility to public or unlisted. And I've been asked to let you know as attendees that the session may be posted publicly, and I'd probably be pretty strongly in favour of posting it publicly. So if you do wish to conceal yourselves from YouTube visually, you should probably take the opportunity at this point to turn your camera off. This morning / this evening, we have an agenda. Tanya, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So just very briefly, we'll be going through these points over the course of the meeting and then throwing open to a general discussion in the second half of the meeting. But we were briefly going to give some background on the reason for the group, an overview of the group's objectives, progress to date, some potential changes, next steps. And then we were going to throw it open to the group for some fairly wicked problems that the groups encountered across our first 4 meetings. And at that point, I will hand over to Tanya to give you all a respite from my horrible voice.
So I'm just going to talk a bit about the background. We have online here the god of data quality, Arthur Chapman, and so basically the 2 of the most recent attempts to deal with overlapping issue in this space have been Arthur's 2020 report on current best practices for generalising sensitive species data, and then also and the development of a standardised national framework for restricted access species data in Australia. As part of this framework project, we reached out to national and international data aggregators to better understand their sensitive data policies and to gauge interest in standardising the approach to documenting sensitive data. So this issue is not a new one, obviously. Arthur's been working on it a very long time, and his report recommended a set of fields to add to occurrence data to the Darwin core location class. The restricted access species data framework in Australia that we developed in 2023, it defines high levels of categories for restricted access species data or sensitive data, which basically form the basis of our discussions. Then in 2023, at the Tadwig conference, we held a workshop, and it was agreed that there was a need to have an nationally agreed standard for standardising how we deal with and categorise sensitive species data. So in addition, after concerns that GBIF might be exposing some sensitive data, they commissioned a report which was published last year, and there was recommendations from that as well around how the use of a global framework for and vocabularies for listing and identifying sensitive species, and making sure that they were consistently flagged and defined. I'll hand back to Cam to talk about the objectives of the task groups and some of our guiding principles.
Thanks, Tanya. So, and I suppose just to throw it there for those people here this evening who might be less familiar with sensitive data, what we're talking about here is really species records or data sets in some instances where some aspect of the record or the data set or even with a field within the record, there might be reasons for withholding that information from public availability, or alternatively, for example, masking of generalizing coordinates or similar. One of the things that the group discussed at an early point was actually shifting the name from sensitive species, because we've already found that the experience in Australia, and this was reflected in the discussion in the extension working group, the term sensitive data tends to get very confused with other forms of sensitive data. So, for example, sensitivity within government documents and the like. And there's been some discussion about adopting the term restricted access species data because it describes the action that's being taken on the data. However, and this has been a bit of a recurring discussion over the first couple of meetings. What we don't want to do is suggest to users of Darwin Core that the first option should be withholding data, and really I'll talk about a bit more than that in a moment. But the objectives of the group are really to basically build on Arthur Chapman's the proposed extension in Arthur Chapman's report to develop an extension which captures why records for sensitive taxa have been generalised, an extension which captures how records for sensitive taxa have been generalised, and standard vocabularies for the sensitive reasons and treatments. Can you? And so, as I've already noted, the guiding principles, while everyone in the group recognises the importance of recognising that some data is sensitive, needs to be restricted, I think we're all in agreement that the focus is actually encouraging people, if you like, to shrink wrap what gets modified, because the more data that is available for conservation in research, the better that we're serving the biodiversity of the planet. And withholding data might serve conservation in limited extents, but in many other cases, it's actually actively harming it. The other guiding principles which we're working to is if it's necessary to withhold details of a data record or a data set, the reason is specific enough to enable a user to understand the reasons why and plan the next steps. So if a record is being withheld or modified in some way, according to FAIR principles, there's enough information there for a user of that data to make an informed decision about whether they continue to try to access the data, whether they just accept the data as is, generalised or modified in which form it's been modified, or whether in some instances they may just decide to give up. The second guiding principle, or third guiding principle, sorry, is that the extension needs to be able to handle the breadth and variation of sensitive species data management actions across data custodians, because no two data custodians are likely to be the same. In the Australian experience, where while the Commonwealth government, the national government, doesn't have sensitive data or sensitive species data restrictions, all of the states and territories do. And whereas in one jurisdiction, all threatened species might be treated as sensitive data and have their points generalised, in most states and territories, there are other treatments, and most commonly there is an attempt to identify specifically the species that are at most risk from threats like poaching or habitat disturbance that is specific enough that it does warrant withholding of locational records or locational fields. So being able to deal with that kind of broad range of flexibility is a really important thing for the extension. Tanya, I'm going to hand back to you again.
Thanks, Cam. I'll just talk a little bit about the progress so far. So we set the task group up last year, and we've had 4 meetings since then, roughly once a month, give or take Christmas and Easter and other impediments to meeting. So far, we've drafted a vocabulary for sensitivity reasons and also another one for treatments. And we've had a few iterations of them and expanded on them. We drafted a set of use cases and tested them against the sensitivity reasons and treatments, and added and amended a few of those. to meet the use cases. So we're still looking for extra use cases for some of the vocab reasons and treatments as well. So just as a bit of a, I'll just go on to the next slide, which is a list of all the sensitivity reasons that we've got so far. It's not really meant to be read, but just give you an idea of how we're starting to classify sensitivity reasons. So for instance, we have categories and then subcategories. One of the ideas behind this is that we want people to classify the sensitivity reasons as finely as possible. So we wouldn't necessarily want someone to classify at the category level, but rather the subcategory level. So it gives more information to a user about the reason why something's been determined sensitive. And that may be a record, it may be an attribute within a record, or particular attributes within records that are sensitive, or it may be a whole data set depending on what the reason is. So for example, we've got things like personal information, information about where a species is located might be sensitive, identification of a species might be sensitive. So for that example here is if a biosecurity species that hasn't been recorded in a country has been recorded, that information might be sensitive until it's validated, as it might affect trade in that country. Information about attributes of a species such as nesting or different life stages might be sensitive. There might be usage restrictions on the data that either might be legal or otherwise under agreement that it's not shared for whatever reason. And then something that we haven't really delved into a lot because we haven't done a lot of research on it, and it would take a long time, but we want to actually flag that there are Indigenous reasons for or sensitivities relating to data or species or location. So we've got placeholders there for those at this stage. Then we've also identified treatments. Again, they've got categories and subcategories. So there's either withholding data, whether that's a whole data set, a record or an attribute, and then also whether it's for an embargo period. Then there's obfuscation of coordinates, and there's different degrees of that and different methods for that. Generalizing attributes, so that could be any attribute within an occurrence record, obfuscating time or date, and then there's just a catch-all at the moment for other treatments which may not fit into those categories. Yeah, so that's kind of where we've gotten to. So that leads us to what the potential changes to Darwin Core might be, and that so we are looking to have an extension for Darwin Core for restricted access species data. So hopefully we'll have developed an agreed set of controlled vocabularies for both sensitivity reasons and treatments. We'll have a set of use cases to help guide users as to which treatments and reasons within the vocabularies they apply to their data, and then also a set of standardized text for obfuscated attributes or records or data sets where when those attributes or records or in the metadata for data sets, it actually clearly explains that there is sensitive data in there and what has happened and why. And now I'll just hand over to Cam to talk about the next steps for this year for the task group.
Thanks, Tanya. So yeah, so thus far the group's had 4 meetings. We've really been meeting in anger since late last year. So we've as you've seen from Tanya's emails, I think sorry, not emails, slides. I think we're progressing quite well in terms of moving. And our next steps are to basically collect more use cases and test the vocabs for each of the reasons and treatments. Agree on those set of vocabs. Develop some standard replacement text. Agree on an implementation method, and start to draft a standard for review. And in an ideal world, we'd kind of like to be in the position where we were looking at having something fairly meaningful towards the end of this calendar year. And as you can see, Tanya's dog, Lucky, is looking forward to it as well. Um, Tanya, I'll head back to you to round up, and then we can get on to the discussion. So if you want to talk about the one-to-many relationships.
Sure. So something we've realised as we're developing the vocabularies that it's not a one-to-one. So if a sensitivity reason may warrant like a number of different treatments to a record. So and then also vice versa, you get you might have several different reasons for sensitivity for one particular species, which may require one or more treatments to the record or the data set. Most of the people in the group are quite new to TADWIG and haven't been involved in developing standards or Darwin Core extensions or anything like that. So we've only got kind of a quite limited view of how an extension like this might work when there is a one-to-many relationship or perhaps a many-to-many relationship. So we've been talking, we're aware of extended measurements of facts. Would something like that be useful? Would that be useful? Would the creation of additional fields with multiple values be useful? We did talk about that, but then it's going to be hard to tease them apart if you include multiple values within one field. And there may be other options or suggestions from those who've had a lot more experience than us in this area. So just as an example of what I'm talking about, so for example, the species record might contain collector IDs of individuals where there's its personal identifiable information, and it can be resolved to a collector's name or other information about them. It might also contain species information about the species that might include something like nesting sites or reproductive status or something like that. And then the treatments would potentially be withholding some attributes, for example, locality information, the collector's IDs. You may also want to obfuscate coordinates, so you will generalize coordinates to one decimal place or two decimal places. You may also generalize some attributes. So, for example, you might replace the collector ID with a standard set of text saying that it's been withheld for X reason, or you might replace locality information with some sort of generalized value, whether that might be nearest town, like local government area, state, etc. And then you also might want to generalize the time and date, for example, so you're not showing people when particular species are breeding or nesting. So like for this example, you'd have, for one record, you may have 2 reasons and 4 different treatments on the same record. So how do we represent that as a standard and attribute that to a record? So with that, I'll open it up to discussion because This is the main reason we wanted to do this workshop today, because we wanted to get help with thinking about what some of the options might be for us to do that.
Thanks, Tanya. So look, uh, I got to say I'm more familiar with Teams than I am with Zoom, but we'll see how we go. Uh, I suppose if people firstly have any, for those that are new to the group, whether there's any questions that uh, you might have about what we're doing, the philosophy of it, where we're headed, any obvious holes, or also we welcome any comments on the whole one-to-many thing, because it does seem to be complicated, but on the other hand, far better than having uh, 32 discrete fields added to a standard Darwin core um, table, which would make it a bit messy. So, look, if anybody does have thoughts or comments or questions, please put your hand ups, and if I can find them on Zoom, I will. John?
Um, I would rather wait to see if there are questions from people who need better orientation before I start, but I wanted to put the hand up as for talking about potential solutions or ways to approach the many to many or one to many stuff.
No worries. I hope I haven't put everybody to sleep. It's 9 o'clock. It's nearly 9:30 here, so
In the evening.
in the absence of any other hands, John, I might get. Do you want to kick off the discussion, and maybe we can start there and come back round to any other questions people might have?
Sure. Um, the way I wanted to approach this was whether or not you have already found a challenge to representing these data in Darwin Core as a Darwin Core archive and within the constraints of a Darwin Core archive, or if you don't know how you would do it with a Darwin Core archive. And the reason I asked that is when I looked at your examples, I see immediate solutions in what we will be proposing later in the year for Darwin Core data packages, which is taking away the limitation of a Darwin Core star schema in data publishing models. And so, um, based on what I was looking at there, I was saying, okay, here's how I would do it if I was doing it in a Darwin Core data package. But I don't know
Yep.
how I would do it with a Darwin Core archive. I'd have to kind of look at it a lot harder.
Yes.
So, with that in mind, what kind of time frame are you looking at? Do you feel the need to have a Darwin Core archive based solution? Um,
I think we need to come up with a good solution. So I think we need to be flexible.
mhm. Yeah. So the context in which I ask this is my expectation is that Darwin Core archives will live on, that they'll probably have a 5-year lifespan from now,
Right.
and that from that we'll transition into Darwin Core data packages, which can do absolutely everything that a Darwin Core archive can anyway, but for
Okay.
those who need it, can do a lot more. So, um, so if there are people who would be able to handle an Darwin Core extension that works with Darwin Core archives the way they are now, and that's important, then that's the target you need to have, right?
Yep.
Find the solution with that. And if you can do it that way, you can for sure do it with a Darwin Core data package, and you can probably do even more. But that could be a second step. No, get down exactly what it is that you want to accomplish um, with these with sensitivity data. I won't even say how, um, and then work in a second step later to transition that into additions to Darwin Core Data Package. So one thing, just to give you an idea, one thing that's already built into the proposal for Darwin Core Data Packages is the proliferation of both information withheld terms and data generalization terms to different classes within a
Okay.
structured model. It's not stuck at a record level.
Okay.
So you can say specifically, we have location information withheld and talk about why. Um, so that's kind of a preview of how life might actually be easier going forward than to try to figure out how to do it with the Darwin Core Archive.
Okay. Thank you. I think I need to go away and sorry, Chandra, do you want to
Oh, I just like some quick clarifying things here. I know at the beginning you were saying like this is specifically for occurrence records, and obviously like John's point got me thinking about this, but like are we assuming that this could potentially be linked to things that are not occurrence core? Or is that like that's what this discussion is, correct?
yeah, it's definitely
Okay.
focused on occurrences. I mean, there's kind of an interesting overlapping issue, which is so structured survey data. I mean, because the obviously the biggest problem is this space is if you're dealing with plot data, how do you actually protect whatever subset of records you validly need to protect, but still make the plot data useful in a like you either withhold plot data, in which case it kind of buggers the plots, or you withhold the species data and make the plot data incomplete. Um, and there are some pretty wicked problems in there, but at this point, we're treating them as slightly out of scope because we're just trying to get basic observational data covered at this point.
Right. Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I know you brought up because I noticed in in the vocabularies that you talk about like sequence data, and I was wondering if like, okay, could this be added on to like the DNA extension
Yeah.
come Darwin Core version 2?
Yeah, and I think it probably could. We just haven't had enough of a conversation about it.
Gotcha. Thanks. That's all.
No worries. Anyone else? Arthur, was there anything you wanted to add? Because I know we've kind of paraphrased a lot of stuff that have happened in individual meetings.
No, I don't think I've got anything there. I have added the link to my book from 2020 into the chat, and there's a few other things I noticed have been added into the chat if people want to look at it. No, I think you've covered it fairly well. I just noticed one thing on one of your slides was Indigenous data. It's not the data that's Indigenous, it's data from Indigenous people or etc. And that might need to be clarified sometime in the future.
Absolutely. I'm going to throw open to the other members of the working group who are on the call. Any other things that we kind of mischaracterized in a very brief summary? Wow. How to kill all discussion in under 36 minutes in a 1 hour call. That's embarrassing.
This is the opportunity for people to ask questions or put forward some of the problems that they may have with sensitive data And it's broader than just species in many ways. It's other data than
Yep.
just the species data, which my book really covered just the species data, but there are broader issues there. But there are a lot of people I notice in the audience, and it'd be good to get comments from people if they have particular issues or use cases to do with sensitivity of data.
I've just put up
Ben?
the sensitivity reasons that we've put, what we've got so far. But if there's any use cases that you don't think fit within that, it'd be good to hear about them too.
Ben?
Sure. How formal
Sorry.
do you see putting criteria for what is hidden from a sensitive species? Like what information is hidden? Like, is that really part of the standard that you could foresee? So if it's sensitive, part of the standard is not to disclose at minimum latitude, longitude, locality, things like that, sort of more broadly sort of stipulate that. And then the second question is that have you thought about any kind of mechanism for reporting these types of things? I've had a herpetology curator called out in public along with 3 other institutions for publishing a certain turtle sensitive species, which was then my fault, which I fixed immediately as soon as possible because I could have sworn I was doing something about that. And if there's a problem in a pipeline, but some sort of reporting mechanism that would allow people to sort of indicate certain sensitivities in certain areas.
Good questions. I think the first one, which has now gone out of my head because I was focused on the second one. Sorry, what was the first question again?
Like a compliance criteria such that you say to comply with this, the minimum recommendation is to hide these fields, and then from there it's up to the data provider. But
so it's kind of interesting because the process of developing I suppose a common national framework in Australia, the experience has been that we were originally trying to move towards a common standard. So we've kind of said for certain types of activities, these are the kind of things you should consider, but we've fallen short in Australia of actually saying this is exactly what you will do in this instance in every occurrence that it takes place. And I think we're going to run into the same issue internationally. So in the working group, I think there's been really valid examples where in some countries for sensible reasons, records have been effectively generalised to a point within a county, for example, whereas in Australia, we currently the commonest national practice is just removing decimal seconds and minutes, depending on the level of generalisation required. And we've also seen examples where, say, iNaturalist randomizes within a polygon shape. So I don't think. I think we could. I think it's more important that the standard, the descriptions in the fields provide sufficient information for a user to determine what's been done than necessarily getting agreement at this juncture on what standard treatment should be applied within a particular type, if that makes sense. Like, I think that basically the FAIR principles are more important than the standardization.
I will mention 2 things about that. This is one of the few fields where I've had a curator that just wants to be told what to do, which is not usually the case. But people I've talked to, they just want to know, what is everybody else doing? How are we hiding this? They don't want to take the decision sort of off their plate, sort of more broadly across the community. And I will say one other thing, and then I have to start the next working session. Camera traps, as they get introduced in there, is a totally different situation than species data. And to make sure to look at the camera traps, like the data is not useful if it doesn't have georeference at all. Like, it's just not. And so for ecological modeling and things, so if you don't, so there's a whole different procedure where in collections it was pretty easy because it's just get rid of these 4, just set all these 5 to null and then put a note, information withheld, that this has been withheld because so forth and so on. But camera traps told a story, and they're also park rangers in Africa that get shot, and so there's a whole nother level of delicate nature to some of these things and camera traps where you have to hide the people's faces and laws and different things like that. So just a side, and I got to go start the next one. So, but thank you guys. I appreciate it, Cam. And thanks for mentioning at the top of the hour too. I do appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Ben.
Sure.
Cameron, if I might just expand a little bit there too. The sensitivity of one of the reasons of tying it, you can't just say this species is sensitive. It may be sensitive in one particular area, but it may be a weed in another country. And so people need to be able to be fairly flexible in how they treat these things. Even there are species in Australia that are fairly sensitive in one area, but are weeds in another area, even within the one country. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing is that in the situation at the moment, there is no transfer of sensitivity across different institutions. And for example, with plants, a lot of people collect in duplicates and they're sent to different institutions around the world. Australia might decide, oh, this is sensitive, we're not going to release the latitude and longitude, but you go and look at the New York Botanic Garden or Kew and you'll find there the detailed information is available. So this is why we need an international standard and a way for people to interact with it in a much better way.
Yeah, the GBIF report that was done last year found that mainly there's that regional lists were better than, because most of the country lists where they existed, they didn't exist in most of the countries, but where they did exist, they were basically using IUCN Red List, which has issues as well, because for the same reason that some of the taxa on those aren't sensitive within the country it's being applied to. And the regional lists were better because they actually take into account sensitivities within the region that the list applies to. And the way we do it in Australia is we have state lists that apply to the state. So on a global scale, you may have country or regional lists that apply just to those areas, and you apply it to the records within that area. We have had issues as well, like eDNA databases that have tons of sensitive records in them and they're not being applied with. We found quite a few things that were coming up across the board. So when we were doing the framework project, but yeah, it is an issue, but I'm not sure how to tackle it. There are some recommendations in the GBIF report, but the main one was regional lists are far better and more relevant in this space than just using global lists or country lists even.
Well, I think having working towards developing an extension like this is potentially the first step in actually having a meaningful international dialogue, and how you actually try to not necessarily develop an international list, as Arthur and Tanya both said. It's practically very, very difficult. But if we could work towards a system of regional lists which get globally implemented, that's got to be better for conservation around the planet. Noting, as I said at the start, I think it's really important that the principle of this extension is not trying to provide everybody with an excuse for withholding data, but shrink wrapping what we're treating as restricted access or sensitive to the things that need it. And I'm pretty sure Will's here on the call somewhere, and I don't know if he wants to give his view on that, because I think he makes this argument really, really articulately.
Do I, or do I just sound like a broken record?
Well, yeah, important record, Will.
No, I have let's say I'll play devil's advocate, but I often have a concern that when dealing with restricted access and sensitive species data, we do sometimes forget the negative aspects of restricting data, and that it comes with a cost. I mean, there's the burden of handling restricted data, both for the people wanting to get it and the people disseminating restricted access data. So I think we do need to somehow, and then of course there's the flow-on effects of having restricted data restricts the positive aspects of having that data out there. So I think we need to bake into, as to the extent we can, the idea that restricting data should only occur when it is actually fundamentally necessary, and there should be, yeah, I don't know the answer to how to do that, but I think in the language that we use and the way that we in our controlled vocabularies and those sorts of things, as much as we can, we should, yeah, make sure we're not just creating an environment where we're restricting more and more data, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. And I completely agree, as you know. I'm also kind of aware we're coming to the end of the allotted time, but were there any other comments or thoughts that people had? John?
Yeah, I'm keen to help from the technical side, realizing that a lot of what you're dealing with is the social side here. So I did not see proposals for technical solutions more than the categories of things that you're interested in capturing. Is that truly the case, or did I miss something? Is that a next step you're trying to solve?
That'll be a next step. I think
Okay.
kind of working our way through treatments and vocabs is going to take us a bit of time, but it would be really good to get your thoughts before we start tackling that, because I don't think Tanya or I regard ourselves as experts, and we lean heavily on Arthur's expertise in particular. So any thoughts or ideas you had would be most welcome.
Yeah, I'd like to be in a conversation of how to do it technically.
Awesome. Thank you. Martin?
Yes, I'm quite new to this group, so sorry for being naive or maybe missing some of the previous discussions going on. But some of these issues seems to be also more related to the data set level and not to the occurrence level itself. So
Yep.
although you focus on occurrences, I think, well, it's mainly like the survey data maybe, but even if someone publishes a data set, there should be some good metadata describing what actually happened with the data in that data set, and that could maybe solve already some or in that data package or whatever.
Yes.
But
Thank you.
I might be naive.
No. We've actually had a number of conversations about this in the working group meetings we've had so far, and we're generally seeing these. And I don't know, Tanya, if you want to talk to this, but we're seeing these as things that can be applied at different resolutions. Tanya, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, even the treatments, they mention attributes or records or data sets. So we're not sort of saying you can't, because like maybe a whole data set might contain information that's considered sensitive for a period of time. For example, if a researcher is doing research and they don't want to publish the results of their research or the species occurrences that form the basis of their research prior to publication, then that whole data set may be embargoed for a period of time until it's published. Things like that. And we may have to consider thinking about how we reflect that in metadata, as well as at the different levels. So whether it's a data set, whether it's an attribute, or whether it's an entire record's withheld for some reason.
Thanks, Tanya. Martin, did that answer your question?
Yeah. I was thinking, for example, if you, but that's the easy one, of course, if you look at survey data, that you could have a field, metadata field like taxa withheld in the whole data set, and then you at least know that someone recorded these somewhere, but they're not published. I mean, and then you have the contact details of the person to contact if you need them, or if there is a good reason to get a hand on those data.
Yeah, it's quite like that as a solution, actually. I hadn't thought of that option.
In my 2020 paper, we give strongly view that the metadata is the key to it. If you're going to restrict the data, why are you restricting it? And we did a bit of a table there on reasons, and Tanya et al. Have then expanded this a bit more, but basically saying these are the key reasons why you might restrict it, and then there are rules as to, is it going to cause, is there harm to this taxon by humans? And if so, will releasing the data increase that harm or reduce that harm, etc. So there's a series of the wording that you might use to add to the metadata to anything that is restricted. Data shouldn't just be restricted without a reason, and a reason being given, so that the user can then look at that data and say, oh, this is restricted. There is other data available. I can go to the owner of the data and request permission for my particular purpose, etc. And that is a large part of what this whole process is trying to develop the metadata that goes with any restriction.
And actually, while I was talking just a moment ago, I was making myself I was thinking maybe there is some role for the data aggregators here as well, because you could only obscure sensitive data after depositing somewhere, which doesn't ensures that those data doesn't get lost. Because if you keep that with a researcher, I mean, if someone just doesn't publish it but says, oh, I didn't publish these taxa, and then he retires or this computer crashes, you lost all data altogether. So maybe there should be some technical solution in place to ensure that this data is always somewhere, according to any kind of non-disclosure agreement or whatever set in place.
Thanks, Martin. I'm just going to read out Chandra's question to everybody. Is an image considered an attribute here? I.e., if someone needs to obscure the image, is the attribute treatment the appropriate one, or other media? I mean, I think, Shelley, it would actually be good to get your thoughts on this, because I know this is something that the herbarium community's been debating at length.
Yeah, so at my institution, we finally ended up making the decision that we would obscure entire labels, because if we started trying to obscure little pieces of labels, then you'd find that the person and the collector number could be linked back to something else or a publication or wherever. Images actually have to be delivered already partially obfuscated if we deem them to be sensitive, or not delivered at all if unless we can find some technology to obfuscate the relevant information and leave the biological material obvious, I guess. So it's complex, quite complex. Some institutions are actually just not delivering images of specimens at all to avoid the issue.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think it is complicated. I think it does merit a similar sort of treatment. I mean, effectively, the pool of treatments that you've got available are not terribly different from what you're dealing with straight observational data.
Yeah.
Chandra's also said, added onto the previous conversation, I imagine in the metadata it would be appropriate to mention how or where to get the full data set. I think so. Anyone got any thoughts on that?
There's always a data curator mentioned with data delivery, so you can contact them, but it comes back to that. What happens if that contact information becomes old, not updated, and it goes nowhere, and then you've got a bit of an issue as well.
And Mariko's added a really interesting question, which is, and this might have to be the last question because we are coming up to the end of our time, but when sensitivity reasons become no longer valid, is there a mechanism to remove those restrictions after reviewing and validating the status change in sensitivity treatment over time?
I guess the way we deal with it in Australia is that our sensitive lists change, and then within the Atlas of Living Australia, we have actually hold the raw data, and we apply those sensitivity lists across the data on a regular basis. So it kind of gets updated when the lists are updated. But that's just one way of doing it, and I'm sure there's others.
But it is probably something worth thinking about in the next group.
Yeah.
Look, I realise the conversation is just picking up, but I might cut it off there in the interests of those people who have other commitments. Look, thank you everybody for making time this evening, this afternoon, or this morning, depending on where you are. And look, I'd really, anybody who's on the call who's new to this topic or new to this group, would love you to sign up. I think Tanya's included the details for our group, and if you could join, please do so. We try to keep the discussion lively, and we try to keep the product moving towards an endpoint. So thank you all, and nice to meet you and or see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Save the chat, Tanya, before you log out.
Okay.
I can get it from Zoom too if you need a backup.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
See you later.
Thanks.
Nice to meet you and or see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Save the chat, Tanya, before you log out.
Okay.
I can get it from Zoom too if you need a backup.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
See you later.
Thanks.